Pregnant, the word echoed in his head, refused to make sense. How could this be happening? How had they let it get this far? Monica seemed surprisingly calm about the whole thing, like she'd already thought it through and had a plan. "We'll figure it out," she said, taking his hand. "We'll get through this together." But all Damian could think was that his life was over before it had already begun. If this story is shocking you so far, click on the like button so more people can learn from it. The pregnancy changed everything and nothing at the same time. Monica's calm demeanor in the immediate aftermath of the revelation gave way to panic as reality set in. She couldn't tell Robert the baby was his, not when he'd had a vasectomy 3 years earlier after they decided they didn't want more children. She couldn't get an abortion without raising questions about why she'd been pregnant in the first place. She was trapped, and she needed Damian's cooperation to navigate the impossible situation she'd created. So she manipulated him with the same skill she'd used to groom him in the first place, weaponizing his guilt, his love for her, his fear of destroying the family, his confusion about his own role in what had happened. She told him that if anyone found out the truth, he would go to prison, that regardless of what had really happened between them, society would see him as the aggressor, the young man who'd seduced his stepmother, who'd broken up a marriage, who'd ruined a family. She painted vivid picture of his future if the truth came out. Kicked out of college before he even started, his name dragged through the courts, his father hating him forever. Everyone in town knowing what he'd done, looking at him with disgust and judgment. She told him over and over that the only way to protect himself, to protect both of them, to protect Robert and their family, was to stay silent and play along with whatever plan she devised. Damian, already drowning in shame and self-blame, believed every word. The plan Monica eventually settled on was as manipulative as everything else she'd done. She told Robert she'd been careless with her birth control, that somehow, despite his vasectomy, she'd gotten pregnant, that maybe the vasectomy had failed or reversed itself, which apparently could happen in rare cases. She acted shocked and confused, but also excited about the unexpected blessing. Robert, who'd never had reason to doubt his wife's fidelity, believed her. He scheduled an appointment with the doctor to verify that his vasectomy was indeed no longer effective, but Monica convinced him to wait until after the first trimester, citing concern about stress and the baby's health. She bought herself time, counting on Robert's trust and his general obliviousness to the dynamics in his own household. Meanwhile, Damian fell apart. The weight of the secret was crushing him. He'd wake up every morning and for a split second forget, and then reality would crash back down and he'll feel like he couldn't breathe. He couldn't look at his father without feeling like the worst person alive. Every kind word Robert said to him, every expression of fatherly pride or affection felt like a knife twisted in his guts. He was betraying the man who'd raised him, who'd done his best after Damian's mother died, who'd never been anything but good to him. And for what? Because he'd been too weak, too confused, too desperate for approval to stand up for himself, because he'd let Monica manipulate him into something unthinkable. The guilt was suffocating, relentless, inescapable. Damian started having thoughts he'd never had before, dark thoughts about ways to make the pain stop, to escape the nightmare his life had become. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except the growing horror of his situation. He was supposed to leave for college in 2 weeks, but how could he leave now? Monica needed him to maintain the lie, to support her story. But staying felt impossible too, like slow torture, like drowning in quicksand while someone around him went about their lives completely unaware of the truth. Monica, sensing Damian's deteriorating mental state, increased her control over him. She would test him constantly, checking in, make sure he wasn't talking to anyone, reminding him of what was at stake. She'd come to his room at night, not for physical intimacy anymore, but for reassurance that he wasn't going to crack, wasn't going to tell. She would oscillate between being affectionate and supportive, telling him how brave he was being, how proud she was of him for handling this so well, and being subtly threatening, reminding him of the consequences if he break his silence. Damian was trapped emotionally, psychologically, and morally. The woman he trusted most had turned his life into a nightmare, and he couldn't see any way out that didn't destroy everything. Every single day the secret grew heavier, more suffocating, more impossible to bear. He stopped caring about college, about his future, about anything except getting through the next hour without completely breaking down. His friends noticed the change, asking if he was okay, if something had happened. He brushed them off with vague excuses about stress and anxiety about starting college. How could he explain the truth when he could barely admit it to himself? How could he put into words the depth of the betrayal, the confusion, the shame that consumed every working moment? The turning point came in mid-August, just days before Damian was scheduled to leave for university. Monica's pregnancy was becoming visible, and Robert's doctor had confirmed that his vasectomy was still very much intact. The numbers didn't add up, and Robert, who had been willfully ignorant up to this point, couldn't ignore the obvious any longer. He came home from work early one afternoon and told Monica they need to talk. He'd been thinking, he said, and something didn't make sense. If his vasectomy was still effective and the doctor confirmed it was, then how was she pregnant? Monica tried to maintain the lie, insisting the doctor must be wrong, that these things could fail, that she hadn't been with anyone else, but Robert wasn't buying it anymore. The pieces were starting to come together in his mind, forming a picture he didn't want to see, but couldn't look away from. That evening, Robert confronted Monica directly, demanding the truth, and Monica backed into a corner with no way out, made a decision that would prove how little she'd ever cared about protecting Damian, despite all her claim to the contrary. She broke down crying and told Robert that Damian had forced himself on her, that she'd been trying to protect him because she knew it would destroy Robert to learn his son had done something so terrible, that she'd been living in fear for months but couldn't bear to tear the family apart. She painted herself as the victim, the noble stepmother who'd sacrifice her own well-being to protect her husband's relationship with his son. It was a masterclass in manipulation, in self-preservation at any cost, and Robert, devastated and confused and desperate for answers, believed her. The explosion of truth, or rather Monica's version of truth, destroyed the family completely, and immediately Robert confronted Damian with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face, demanding to know how he could have done this, how he could have violated the woman who'd been nothing but good to him. Damian, already emotionally shattered, tried to explain, tried to tell his father what had really happened, how Monica had groomed him, manipulated him, crossed boundaries he didn't know how to defend, but his word came out jumbled and desperate, and through Robert's lens of betrayal, they sounded like an excuse of a guilty person trying to shift blame. "Your stepmother trusted you," Robert said, his voice breaking. "We both did. How could you do this to us?" The police were called within hours. Monica had already gotten her story straight, had already positioned herself as the victim of an inappropriate relationship initiated by her troubled stepson. She told investigators that Damian had become obsessed with her, had made advances she'd repeatedly rejected, that she'd tried to handle it quietly within the family, but he'd eventually forced himself on her. She cried at the right moment, expressed shame about the pregnancy and devastation about the betrayal of trust, painted a picture of a confused young man who'd crossed unforgivable line. The investigators, seeing an adult woman reporting assault by her teenage stepson, believed her account. After all, why would she lie? What would she possibly gain from admitting to an affair if one hadn't happened? Her willingness to report the incident seemed to confirm her version of events. Damian was arrested on a warm August evening just 2 days before he was supposed to start college. They processed the charges, sexual assault. The word didn't make sense. He was the victim here, wasn't he? He was the one who'd been manipulated, groomed, controlled, but in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of his community, in the eyes of his own father, he was the perpetrator, the aggressor, the one who'd destroyed a family. The legal proceedings that followed were a special kind of torture. Damian's court-appointed attorney advised him to take a plea deal, explaining that fighting the charges would likely result in a larger sentence and that his chances of convincing a jury of Monica's manipulation were slim to none. Who would believe that a grown woman would groom and sexually abuse her stepson? People understood teachers abusing students, coaches abusing athletes, priests abusing parishioners, but a stepmother systematically manipulating her own stepson. That narrative didn't fit neatly into the existing framework of abuse, didn't match what people thought they knew about sexual violence. Adding to the fact that Damian was 18 when the sexual contact occurred, legally an adult, and his case has become even murkier. How could an adult man be a victim of seduction? Wasn't he responsible for his own choices? Damian, exhausted and broken, and completely out of option, took the plea deal. He pleaded guilty to charges he didn't fully understand, to crimes that didn't accurately represent what had happened to him, because the alternative was risking years in prison if a jury didn't believe his version of events. He was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, followed by 5 years of probation and mandatory registration as a sex offender. His college acceptance was revoked. His future, the one he'd been planning for, disappeared completely. And perhaps worst of all, his father wouldn't speak to him, wouldn't even look at him during the sentence hearing. Robert sat on Monica's side of the courtroom, his arm round around her shoulder, supporting the woman who'd destroyed both their lives while treating his own son like a stranger. Monica's baby, a girl, was born in March the following year. DNA testing confirmed what everyone except Robert already knew, but that Monica continued to deny. Damian was the biological father. The revelation forced Monica's hand, shattered the last remnant of her carefully constructed lie. She couldn't maintain the fiction that Robert was the father when genetic science proved otherwise, and she couldn't keep blaming Damian as the sole aggressor when the timeline of the pregnancy aligned perfectly with their encounters. The truth, messy and complicated and damning for both of them, finally emerged, but then the damage was done. When the truth finally came out, it destroyed the family completely. A father lost his wife to the revelation that she'd been systematically abusing his son, that everything he'd believed about his family was a lie built on manipulation and deceit. A son lost his childhood, his innocence, his sense of self. He lost years to incarceration, lost his future to a criminal record that will follow him forever, lost the ability to trust anyone who claimed to care about him, and the family lost its identity forever. Robert filed for divorce immediately, the betrayal too deep to forgive or move past. He tried to reach out to Damian, tried to apologize for not believing him, for not seeing what was happening under his own roof, but the damage to their relationship was irreparable. How do you come back from that? How do you rebuild trust after such a fundamental fracture? Damian served his full sentence despite new evidence of Monica's manipulation coming to light. The criminal justice system isn't designed to easily reverse convictions, and his plea deal made it even more complicated to challenge the original charges. Monica was eventually charged with sexual abuse of a minor, not for what happened after Damian turned 18, which was technically legal if morally reprehensible, but for the grooming that had occurred in the months and years prior. She pleaded guilty and received a sentence of 3 years in prison, followed by probation and sex offender registration, far less time than Damian had served for being her victim. The little girl, innocent in all of this, was placed in foster care when her both biological parents were incarcerated. Robert, despite having raised Damian, and despite his connection to the child's biological father, had no legal claim to her. He'd been a stepfather, not an adoptive father. The child became another casualty of the situation, another life disrupted by the selfish action of adults who should have protected the vulnerable people in their care, but instead destroyed them. Today, Damian is trying to rebuild a life from the ashes of the one Monica destroyed. He's in his mid-20s, now working a minimum wage job because his criminal record makes it nearly impossible to find anything better. Living in a small apartment far from the town where he grew up, where everyone knew his story and judged him for it. He's in the therapy trying to process the trauma, trying to understand that what happened to him wasn't his fault, even though he still carried the crushing guilt and shame. His relationship with his father remained complicated, strained by years of betrayal and misunderstanding. They talk occasionally. Robert carries his own guilt, his own shame for not seeing what was happening, for believing Monica's lies, for abandoning his son when Damien needed him most. Some wound cut too deep to fully heal, and sometimes the best you can do is to learn to live with the scars. This story isn't just about betrayal, though that's certainly part of it. It's about abuse of power, about manipulation, about stolen innocence. It's about what happens when someone who's supposed to protect you becomes your worst predator. It's about the way our society still struggles to recognize certain form of sexual abuse, still clinch to narrative that doesn't account for the reality of grooming and power dynamics and psychological control. We understand, at least theoretically, that adults in position of authority can abuse children and teenagers, but we still hesitate when the victim is male, when he's 18 or older, when he didn't physically fight back, when the abuser is a woman. We struggle to see this situation clearly, to recognize abuse when it doesn't fit our preconceived notion of what abuse looks like. Damian was victimized twice, first by Monica's systematic grooming and manipulation, and then by a system that couldn't recognize him as a victim because he didn't fit the expected profile. He was punished for being abused, labeled a criminal for being manipulated, forced to carry shame for acts that were fundamentally not his fault. And he's not alone. There are countless others out there, young men and boys, who've been abused by adult women in position of trust, who can't come forward because they knew they won't be believed, who carry trauma and shame in silence because society tells them they should have enjoyed it, should have wanted it, should take responsibility for their own victimization. If you or someone you know is facing emotional or sexual abuse, speak up, talk to someone you trust, reach out to professionals who understand trauma and manipulation. Don't suffer in silence believing you're all alone or that what's happening is your fault. Abuse thrives in secrecy, and predators like Monica count on their victim feeling too ashamed or confused to report what is happening. But you deserve better. You deserve safety, respect, autonomy over your own body and choices. If you are hearing this and thinking about someone in your life who might be in a similar situation, pay attention. Trust your instincts. The signs of grooming aren't always obvious, but they are there if you know what to look for. Boundary violation that seems innocent, excessive emotional intimacy, isolation from peers, shame and secrecy, adults paying inappropriate amount of attention to young people in their care. Silence only protects predators. Speaking up might feel impossible, might feel like it will destroy everything, but that destruction is caused by the abuser's action, not by the victim's disclosure. The truth might hurt, might be messy and complicated and difficult, but it's also the only path to healing, to justice, to preventing further harm. What lesson do you think this story teaches? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone.